Hello, I'm Hayden Kopser, and I'm going to teach you how to become an app developer. You could use the term app developer or computer programmer relatively interchangeably nowadays, although these are technically different things depending on what you're trying to do. The first thing you may be wondering is, how am I going to learn how to make apps if this is only an audio recording? Even more so, by the end of this, you may be saying, I've not learned how to write a single line of code. The reason for that is that it is important to understand what you are doing and why you are doing it before you begin. In the case of making apps, and we could be talking about Android apps, iPhone apps, desktop apps, or web apps, for example, a website that offers advanced functionality. When you are making these things, what you're essentially doing is you're using computer code to manipulate data and to potentially change what people see on a screen. Why would we need to do that? In most videos, most instructional introductions to programming that you will find, people will have you write basic code. They'll have you, for example, declare what is called a variable. They'll probably have you print out to the screen the phrase "Hello World." There are reasons for this, and these are things you are going to have to do or do in a similar fashion if you're going to become a programmer. However, before we get into those topics and how to do those, we need to think about what we are doing. The basis of computer programming is to allow us to do things that you could do maybe in the physical world or in the conceptual world, and being able to do them on a computer. A computer nowadays could be a phone, it could be a laptop, a desktop, a smartwatch, depending on its functionality. There are a lot of different computers. It's not all so simple now to define a computer, but that's fine. So if we want to abstract these real world things that we might do, for example, storing information about an employee. Let's say you're a business owner. If you wanted to store information about an employee, if you just needed their name, you could just store the name John. Let's say their name's John. You could do that programmatically using a variable. Basically, any programming language will let you declare, we'll get into what declaring is, a variable and say, keep the string of text, JOHN, in association with this variable. So whenever I mention that variable, it tells me that it stores the name John. Now that's useful, and sometimes you only need to store a small bit of information, maybe a name, maybe a number, the number of times someone's clicked something on a screen. You could store these things in a variable. You could store other things as well. But John, in this case, is a person. Person has a lot of other qualities. They have a height, they have a weight, they have eye color, they have hair color, they have a phone number, chances are, they have an email address, they have any other number of things that make them a person. There are billions of things if we want to get into their cell structure and all that good stuff. But I don't think we'll have to do that programmatically. So how then, let's say John's my employee, I need to store more information. I need to know all the basics that I just mentioned, or some of those. Probably don't need to know his hair color. I know that just looking at him. But maybe I need to store information about his salary, how long he's been working here, what his date of birth is, his social security number, if he has one. If I need to store these, I don't want to take multiple variables. I could end up with 20, 50 variables. But I do need to store these things. So what if I could create an object? What if I could abstract John, the person, and put some pertinent info about him into data form? We could do all sorts of things with that. We could eventually automate his payment schedule. We could send him an email to remind him to sign up for his health insurance program, for the company health insurance program annually. We could do any number of things once we have the data there to manipulate. And if it's in an object, we can mention in our programming, in our code, we want to talk to the John object. We want to get information here. We could write, if we have that data stored, we could write a program that sends him that health insurance enrollment email. And we can basically automate it. So I don't even have to walk over to John and tell him this. I don't have to remember to do this. I have this stored. Now, when I say stored, you might think being stored in a database. Yes, that is ultimately what you're going to do as you build more complex apps. But in the meantime, you can store him in an object, which is a form of a variable. It's basically a variable that stores multiple sub-variables. Now, we could call these properties. You could call these different things, but not to make that too complex. But you can start to see, okay, well, then what if we had, you're going to say to yourself, multiple employees? We don't just have John. We've got multiple employees who have all these different properties, these pieces of information that make them unique. What would we do if maybe we needed to email, 20 different people and remind them about healthcare enrollment, or remind them that we're off on Memorial Day, or that we've got a half day leading into Labor Day? All these things, and if you've worked at a company, you've seen these, or if you've been to school, you know what these automated emails look like. It says your name, it says John, Susie, whoever. We have this event coming up. Please let us know if you're coming, or please be aware that this is happening. What we can do is we can store information about all of our employees. Now, you might store it in a database, but when you have to use it, you can put it together in a list. We can have a list of all our employees. Now, in programming, this list is often going to be in what is called an array. So you mentioned, I've got an array of items for sale. You could say that as a business owner. In this case, it's the same concept. An array is a list, essentially, of different items. Now, these items could just be numbers. You can have an array of basic variables, but you can also have an array of more complex things, like all of our employees in our imaginary company. And let's say, how do we send emails to all of them? We don't want to send a group email and blind copy, if anyone still blind copies nowadays. We don't want to blind copy all these people. We want to make sure it's a unique email to all of them. We can do what's called iterating through an array. We can take our company list, our employee list, and we can send an individualized email to each of them, taking the information from their employee object, the object that represents them, that's probably stored in our database, and we can write code that sends out that unique email that uses information that we have stored about them. And if you can grasp these concepts, you're going to be able to understand how to do just about everything in programming, except one thing that we have not yet mentioned, and that is how you actually do things. So we've talked about storing things, but we haven't described how you're going to actually send that email, how you're going to notify that employee, how you're going to update the screen if someone's looking at your website and you want to let them know that they've uploaded a form correctly, for example. We do that with what is called in many languages a function, and in some other languages a method. Now, we can get into the terminology at a later time, and we will, but what's important to understand now is a function or a method is a set of code, could be a bunch of lines, could be just one line, it's usually several lines, where it basically says, I want to use these variables, whatever we give it, or I want to talk to these objects, and I want to do something. I want to send that email. I want to notify the screen, put out in a pop-up, or change something on the screen. And with that concept, understanding a basic variable, understanding what an object is, what an array is, and what a function is, we have the basis for what computer programming is about, how it works, the tools that you have at your disposal. At most basic level, it gets very complex. If you can grasp this, The next videos, next audios I do are going to be very helpful, and you're going to be able to take them and do something that becomes functional, that allows you to make websites, allows you to make mobile apps, desktop apps, write code that manages databases and updates information. All of these tools and other helpful tools that you're going to have at your disposal that are often built on these are going to be in your toolbox anytime you go and write a program. So it's important, and I hope you go away from this saying, I understand some of the basic ideas here, and I understand the why also. I understand what we're trying to do. We're abstracting physical concepts. We're putting them into code. We're essentially digitizing them, and we're getting tools that we can use to manipulate them. And if you're thinking forward, you can realize how powerful this becomes. And in future examples, you'll be able to experience it. You'll write code, and you'll know exactly how powerful it can be.